Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for January 28th, 2022. And on this episode, I've got a status report on the Defend the Guard Act, which is currently, as of today, been introduced in 13 states. I believe it is absolutely the most difficult state-level legislation that we're tracking to get passed right now. But it's also one of the most important ones, especially if we take into account the many warnings from the founders and old revolutionaries on the dangers of war and standing armies. So I'm going to today do a quick overview of what the legislation is. I'm going to give you a link or two so you can read and learn more about it, and then an update on the legislation that we're tracking and watching so far. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is everything you need to follow us, all the archives. On individual episodes like this one today, I'll include the links and references that I mentioned so you can read and learn more and even take action in support of legislation in your area. You can find all the different platforms we're on, video platforms and audio-only podcast edition. I really appreciate the reviews that have been coming in on the podcast on Apple and elsewhere. That really helps us spread the word. And you can also find our membership program and even this t-shirt, this new Benjamin Franklin t-shirt that I'm wearing right now. There never was a good war or a bad peace, according to Benjamin Franklin, shortly after the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. Anyways, the show homepage, you can also find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise not to take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this info out in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And to start out, a quick overview of the Defend the Guard Act, which we included for the first time this year in its own section in our annual State of the Nullification Movement Report, which is a free download, 148 pages. You can read it PDF, Kindle, or EPUB, or Apple Books, stuff like that. It's on pages 132 to 137, I think. But here, covering this, the Defend the Guard Act can make it difficult for the feds to drag the U.S. into unconstitutional wars. States can actually take an action against federal imperial policy. This bill would prohibit the deployment of states' National Guard troops in active duty combat, which is a key phrase there, unless there is a declaration of war from Congress as required by the Constitution. Going further, passage of the legislation would force the federal government to only use the Guard for 3 expressly delegated purposes in the Constitution. It spells it out in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 15 and 16. 1, to execute the laws of the Union. 2, to suppress insurrections. And 3, to repel invasions. Doesn't say anything about occupying other countries, I'll tell you that. At other times, Guard units would remain where they belong, at home, supporting and protecting their home states. And that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point. And you can actually have quite a bit of an impact. You may think, oh, well, what would this do? The actual structure of how American foreign policy has gone has relied heavily on these Guard troops to accomplish so many of their unconstitutional occupations, kinetic actions, bombings, invasions, and the like in recent decades. Guard troops, we report, have played significant roles in all modern overseas conflicts. This is again from our annual report. With over 650,000 deployed since 2001. I think that statistic's probably old and it's probably closer to 750,000, but I have not seen an update. Military.com reported that Guard and Reserve units made up about 45% of the total force sent to Iraq and Afghanistan and received about 18.5% of the casualties. So Guard units are definitely playing a significant part about this. And we know that just in December, somewhere around 1,000 Guard troops were sent to Africa from Florida, maybe Virginia or West Virginia and elsewhere. what the heck are they doing in Africa? But if you say that we're not going to allow you to use these for unconstitutional purposes, like they've been doing for decade after decade after a decade, we know that they don't like this stuff. And we know that the Pentagon sees this as a threat to their power. Otherwise, they wouldn't have threatened the state of West Virginia, which a couple of years ago was actually moving forward. It looked like it was going to pass. They actually threatened West Virginia with going on the BRAC list. That's the base realignment and closure list. Hey, if you guys do this, we're going to shut down these bases. We're going to move them other places. The reason is because this is a threat to what they want to do. So if you want to learn more about the details of this legislation, this is just a real quick overview. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. And I see in my notes here, it is pages 132 to 137. Now, speaking of West Virginia, that's really the place where we've seen the most action on this in recent years. We have House Bill 2138. If we're looking at the legislation we're tracking, which was filed by Delegate Pat McGeehan, once again, as he has been for a number of years. I think 2014 or 2015 was the first time he started that. So he's really been leading the charge on this, often alone. It doesn't matter if you're standing on principle. If you're the only person doing it, you're still doing the right thing. The bill is currently in the House Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security Committee. It's, again, House Bill 2138, which in 2021, the chair, I think Roland Jennings was the guy's name, he refused to even let it get a hearing. Once it actually moved to the House floor, it got a vote, and then it looked like it may pass a couple of years ago, even just one chamber. Then threats came in from Washington, D.C., and then following up, this dude has been holding it up. So it could take quite a bit of pressure, people calling the members of that committee saying, if you live in West Virginia, hey, we support this legislation. That's the only thing that will get it to move forward. Here, I'm pulling up on the screen. It's the Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security Committee. If you live in West Virginia, be firm but polite. If you're a jerk, it won't work. I say that over and over. Let every member of the committee know that you personally support House Bill 2138 and you want to see it get to the next committee and then the House floor, because it has to go to the Judiciary Committee after that. You want to see it move out of committee, at least get a hearing, a debate, and a vote. That's incredibly important. Next up is Kentucky, which is House Bill 360. Again, I will link to reports on these and legislation and action items that I'm mentioning in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. The Kentucky bill, all these bills generally have the same approach, like I mentioned right at the beginning, but some of them have a couple of wrinkles. Here in Kentucky, House Bill 360, which is currently in the House Committee on Committees. I wasn't familiar with that one. Maybe it's a procedural thing. I'm not sure. But they also added this piece. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Kentucky National Guard and any member of the Kentucky National Guard shall not be released from the state into active duty, any kind of active duty, unless the federal government has satisfied any outstanding balance to the Kentucky National Guard. Mike Meharry, who did the report on this, spoke with the sponsor personally, and I guess there's been some issue about the feds paying their bills, and they were about a year late on something. So he decided, hey, look, if you guys aren't even paying for it, you aren't even paying what you owe, and we're having to come on our hands and knees begging to you, we're just not going to let you get the troops. So pay up. I mean, you're ripping everybody off in the first place. So anyways, so House Bill 360, I thought that was an interesting wrinkle on that piece of legislation. In Kansas, there's two bills that were actually committee bills, which is surprising. A lot of times it's one or two sponsors or a couple of co-sponsors that are, in essence, sticking their neck out against the establishment to try to push this through, like McGeehan. And he's been doing this for years, but now we're seeing in Kansas, on both the House and Senate side, this is a committee-sponsored bill. So the committee agreed, we're going to go forward and sponsor this. It's House Bill 2501 and Senate Bill 370. I thought it was really interesting because Senate Bill 370 is up for a hearing next week. I guess that's Monday, January 31st, in the Federal and State Affairs Committee. And it has this interesting piece in it that goes beyond what was introduced in West Virginia or the model legislation that we drafted. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of federal or state law or any federal or state executive order, no member of the Kansas National Guard shall be compelled to receive, nor shall be disciplined in any manner for such members' refusal to receive a jab. I mean, it literally says they're going to ban any punishment against Kansas National Guard for not taking a shot. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Plus, not releasing them into active duty combat unless Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 and 16 are followed, which they haven't been followed in decade after decade after decade. Again, Senate Bill 370 and House Bill 2501 in Kansas. The Senate side is up for a hearing on January 31st. In Maryland, House Bill 273 from Delegate Robin Grammer is up for a hearing on February 8th in the House Health and Government Operations Committee. And if you live in any of these states that I mentioned, and I talk about this anytime I do a status report on legislation, whether it's a taking on federal gun control or on this taking on the empire, what you want to do is you read the report that I'm talking about. If you're looking on the video here, every time, usually it's the second paragraph, you can see things like Delegate Robin Grammer introduced House Bill 273, and then it says HB 273. It's in red generally. Click that. It'll take you through to the legislation page, and then you're going to have to look up the committee, and then you're going to want to personally call every member of that committee and be firm but polite and say, I support, this is my name, I support House Bill 273 or whatever the bill in question is, and I would like you to support, co-sponsor, and vote yes on this when it comes up for a hearing in whatever committee that you're mentioning. So Maryland House Bill 273. We do have a little bad news, but it isn't dead. In New Hampshire, House Bill 1092, which was introduced by Representative Cody Belanger, I'm not sure, and a number of co-sponsors. There are Republicans on this one, which is pretty cool. It goes back and forth. In some states, it's Democrats, some states, it's Republicans, some states, it's a mix. So it's really an interesting approach to see this. So House Bill 1092 was introduced and already got a hearing, and then a second hearing, which is an executive session in New Hampshire. And the committee that it was in, I can't remember the name of the committee, actually voted 14-2 against the bill. But the process in New Hampshire is unique in that no matter what happens on the committee level, every single piece of legislation does get a vote in the full chamber in the House. So even though it got a recommendation from the committee of inexpedient to legislate says, or they get ought to pass, that means it's very much less likely that it could pass the full House, but it's still possible. So what we're going to need to see is a lot of grassroots support in the free state, hopefully, calling state representatives in support of House Bill 1092. So when that comes up for a vote, at least it has a chance. So it does still have a chance there, although it doesn't look good in New Hampshire, but we are going to follow that one through to the end. And then we have a bunch of other states without anything additional tacked on. There's Idaho, House Bill 462. There's Michigan, House Bill 4058. Missouri, HB 2098. Two bills in Oklahoma, Senate Bill 135 from Nathan Dahm, and I'm not sure who introduced the other one, Senate Bill 1334. In Hawaii, two Democrats introduced House Bill 406. In Florida, they have companion bills, one on the House side, one in the Senate. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. I like seeing this kind of thing. House Bill 261 and Senate Bill 422. South Carolina is House Bill 3528 and just introduced a couple of days ago in Arizona, Senate Bill 1350. And our Arizona team leader, Michael Gibbs, said he's going to be following up on that legislation, hopefully working to organize and support. I will link to reports and legislation and things like that in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And look, at the end of the day, they've really turned volunteering for the Guard, where the primary duty is supposed to be to the states, except for those three categories of basically we're talking about real emergencies. And they've turned that into kind of a de facto conscription of a national military force, an empire larger than any the world has ever seen. But the Defend the Guard Act sets the foundation to at least push back against that and possibly turn it around. And of course, I should mention before we head out of here, this organization, Bring Our Troops Home. It is veteran run, veteran organized. It is the lead grassroots, like we've produced the model legislation that this has all been built on a number of years ago. We provided a lot of the intellectual and historical resources that people have been using, but the people doing the grassroots effort on this, state by state by state, whether it's Utah or New Hampshire or South Carolina, we've seen in Texas, Kansas and elsewhere, is bringourtroopshome.us. I've got that up on the screen here. They've got a great quote. The American people have been constantly lied to, without a doubt. Please check out their website, get involved in their work if you support this type of action. And just to wrap it up here today, before I go too long, because we're celebrating his birthday tomorrow, I think it was 1737, January 29th, Thomas Paine. This is one of my favorite quotes from Paine. He reminds us that war is the art of conquering at home. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it urges you to take action. If you live in any of these states, it urges you to take action in support of that legislation. If you don't live in any of those states, just grab a copy of one of those other bills from one of these other states and ask your own state representative and own state senator to file a similar piece of legislation in your state, whether it's today, tomorrow, anytime, whenever you're watching or listening to this, you got to take action because it's going to take heavy grassroots support to push back on these unconstitutional foreign actions that we've seen for so many decades. If you support the show, you support our efforts, you like what we do at the TAC, please consider a membership. They start out as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And you can also do a few free and easy peasy things to help us spread the word. Smashing the like button on the video platforms, reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, subscriptions, subscribing, get notifications, leaving comments, all that stuff, especially on the mainstream platforms, will help trigger the algorithm a little bit and tell the platform to show us to a few more people. And it really has been helping a lot. We've been reaching and teaching a lot more people than I ever imagined. And I can't thank you enough for the help. And I also can't thank you enough for spending a little bit of your time with me today. I hope you have a great weekend. And I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.